First inaugural Zero Hedge debate has officially popped off, and with it, we see Dave Smith debated Laura Loomer over the Israel-Palestine conflict. Initially, this was going to be a debate between Dave Smith and Destiny over the Ukraine-Russia conflict. What we see is, as this has died down within the recent weeks, because the nature of the Israel-Palestine conflict has completely overtaken the corporate press and the entire media landscape, leaving Zelensky and the Ukrainians completely forgotten about updating the firmware for the NPCs so they can have the next thing to talk about. Well, what we see is this is officially the christening of the media's carcass, because this is proof that independent media is the future. What we see here is Zero Hedge pulled in over 500,000 viewers in the time of this debate being live streamed. On X, what we see is the first independent live debate streamed to Twitter. And because of this, we see that with Twitter being the new media landscape that is the communal square when it comes to the public sector of interaction, well, we now know that this is going to be the format for how people are able to achieve and acquire information online through debates, because they will be able to get them live streamed through places like Twitter, removed from the narrative and control of the corporate press. Let's go ahead and jump into this debate. It was genuinely fantastic. Dave Smith most certainly coming away with a victory. Laura Loomer is quite intelligent, very brilliant, wonderfully well-spoken, but alas, Dave kept pigeonholing her. He would put her into places where she knew she had no recourse but to pivot to another topic, or she would revert back to a talking point which she had already used, and with it, it was very clear that she was dodging. Now let's go ahead and jump into the topic of this debate. It just hit me that one of the best ways to start this off would be a quote from Murray Rothbard from the beginning of Anatomy of the State, and this is what christens the beginning of the book. The greatest danger to the state is independent intellectual criticism. Murray and Rothbard. And Anatomy of the State is one of the pivotal pieces of literature that led me to libertarianism. It's not that long, it's roughly 70 pages, and with it, it is one of the most concise breakdowns of the fundamental reasons of what the state is and isn't, and your role and your subjugation to it. It is a fantastic piece of literature. I cannot recommend it enough. It will be linked in the description down below as per usual, as well everything that I always use in all of my videos, so you can go check out my sources yourself. Now let's go ahead and get into this article from Zero Hedge. Put ourselves in their shoes. Highlights from inaugural Zero Hedge debate. We hope you enjoyed the first Zero Hedge live debate on the Israel-Palestine conflict featuring libertarian comedian Dave Smith and conservative journalist Laura Loomer. By spending 2 hours on a singular topic, allowing each side to scrutinize the other's arguments, we hope that you found last night's debate informative and productive. And it most certainly was informative and productive, and with the ability for this to proliferate en masse across social media, free from restriction across places like Twitter that now are removed from censorship, unlike the censorious regimes that are across Facebook, Instagram, and all the other forms of social media akin to TikTok and so on and so forth, what do we have? We have the ability for independent intellectual criticism of the state to be pushed on the highest and most valuable of platforms, and that would be Twitter, because Twitter is the new political square. And whether people like it or not, this is simply the nature of how the landscape shifts when you have technology that comes in and restructures how we have to orient ourselves under these subsystems. And the one thing that I find so fascinating about this is that this is such a fantastic way to show the nature of how so many of these arguments completely obfuscate so much of the historical context of what is going on within the nature of this conflict and this region. And because of it, it really shows those who rely on talking points and those who have done deep research. And not only just deep research, but deep soul searching to understand the nature of what really makes the merits of these arguments have their value, rather than just saying, well, I'm on team A, that means team B is the enemy, and that means it justifies us doing X for the purpose of Y to achieve Z. Now let's go ahead and jump into the fact of these openings, because here's the deal. Dave Smith and Laura Loomer, as I've already said, both very articulate, incredibly intelligent, but nonetheless, Dave Smith really just came out on top in this one. Laura Loomer is someone who consistently comes out on top in these debates, and many people surprised she was bested, but I would say those who watch Dave Smith and are familiar with his debate performances over the past couple of years, well, let's say this was no surprise. Let's go ahead and jump into their openings.
Israel is at war.
The conflict between Israel and Hamas is rapidly intensifying.
You don't have to do this.
More than 1,300 people slaughtered in Israel.
Chaos, bloodshed, war, terror, and death. Look what's happening today.
Gaza is the most surveilled area in the world. It's an apartheid state.
Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is an offshoot of Hamas.
Moms were raped in a house while their babies were put in an oven.
We will continue to call for a ceasefire, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural Zero Hedge live debate. Zero Hedge is a libertarian, anti-establishment, and fiercely independent media platform which in the past has had its own fair share of adverse encounters with the ruling class and has been censored on multiple occasions by the mainstream media and big tech. My name is Adam Sosnick, host of Valuetainment Media with Patrick Bet-David, and tonight I am honored to host the first ever Zero Hedge debate featuring Laura Loomer right here and Dave Smith, who tonight will be discussing the Israel-Palestine conflict. Most importantly, thanks to all of you guys out there watching live on X and on Zero Hedge right now. We hope you find this debate informative, and we urge you to submit your questions on X. Tonight's format will be 90 minutes of commercial-free, hard-hitting, uncensored debate, and we will leave the last 30 minutes open to answer your questions. With that being said, let's meet our panelists. Laura Loomer, Dave Smith, open-ended. Why don't you introduce yourself, give yourselves your bio, let the people know who you are, and most importantly, what side you fall on this conflict.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Laura Loomer. I'm a conservative investigative journalist. I got my career started working undercover with Project Veritas and James O'Keefe, and I then launched my own independent media company, and a lot of people came to know me through conservative and I guess even independent and libertarian circles because I happen to be the most censored banned woman in the world until Elon Musk gave me my X account back in December. And so I've done a lot of work combating big tech social media censorship. And prior to being banned everywhere, I did a lot of work in the counter-jihad movement, exposing the threat of Islamification. And now I've recently launched my own show, Loomer Unleashed. I ran for Congress as well, twice in the state of Florida as an America First Republican anti-GOP establishment candidate. And now I'm, doing what I can to help get President Trump reelected in 2024.
So you're defending which side of this conflict right now?
Well, I'm defending the humane side, which is the Israeli side, the anti-Islamic terror side. And I don't really think that, when you asked me to first participate in this, I said, well, what's the debate, right? Because you're either against Hamas, you're either against Islamic terrorism, and you condemn the killing of innocent Jewish people who were essentially ambushed, right, in these attacks on October 7th, or you're going to enable it. And so I'm looking forward to, hearing everybody's perspective. But I think that it's interesting. This is a panel of all Jews. I understand that all three of us here today are Jews, and it's interesting that within the Jewish community, there's 15 million Jews left on this planet, and you look at the fact that there's 2 billion Muslims, and yet there's such a fraction, right? There's such a fraction within the Jewish community. And so as a Jew, right, I'm also really looking forward to kind of further understanding, right, how we got here as Jews, why there's not really much unity, it seems, within the Jewish community in condemning the attacks on our people. And I think what's been very alarming to me is generally you see the left, right, take this position of emboldening and propping up and giving a platform to Islamic jihadists and terrorist sympathizers. And I think that since October 7th, I've just become increasingly alarmed at the amount of right-wing voices and even libertarian voices that I've seen try to justify what they call Palestinian liberation. And I oppose it.
Thank you for that intro. Dave Smith, give yourself a brief introduction, and obviously you're sort of on the Palestinian side of things, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll let you explain for yourself.
Yeah, I don't like this Palestinian flag being behind me. I'm not here to represent the Palestinian side.
I did not put that on.
I'm on the side of freedom and natural rights. I am on the side of all nonviolent people, and I oppose all people who initiate violence against peaceful people. But I'm Dave Smith. I'm a stand-up comedian. And a political commentator. A lot of people know me. I'm a regular on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I do a lot of big shows like your great show with the legend Patrick Bet-David and Timcast and Glenn Beck and stuff like that. I think that what Laura just said, opening with this kind of, binary of you either support what Hamas did or you're enabling it, is exactly the problem. And it's been the problem in the United States of America for particularly the last 20 years, but probably much longer than that. This kind of George W. Bush, you're either with us or against us. You either support the war in Iraq or you're Osama bin Laden. Those are your two options. I'm a strict non-interventionist. I also recognize that the situation between Israel and Palestine is enormously complex with many egregious crimes on both sides. And the reason why there's probably some division amongst Jewish people, or there's some division amongst even conservatives and libertarians, is because what's currently happening right now in Gaza is horrific. And it's completely inexcusable. And innocent babies are dying by the thousands. And that's what most people are rejecting. Now, the idea, look, the left wing is pretty goofy. And there's some goofy takes that you'll hear out of them. I have not heard any conservative or any libertarian in any way justifying what Hamas did. So let me start off, because I know that question will be asked of me already. I don't support Hamas. Who do you think I am? Benjamin Netanyahu? I would never support Hamas, as he did actively for years as an intentional strategy to divide the Palestinian movement. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu did. And maybe we'll get into that at some point. But I don't support anybody who initiates violence against peaceful people. I support peace, and I support civilization.
Laura Loomer in her opening sounded exactly like that of a Bush-era neocon in the age of the Iraq War in its height. And the tippy top of that propaganda, we see rhetoric exactly like this. Well, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. And this is exactly what's going on now. Her opening statement, what it is equivalent to is, well, if you don't support Israel, then you must support Hamas. It's this binary thinking that has broken the political landscape, and with it, it doesn't matter how intelligent many people are. If they get activated emotionally, they are so easily tricked into slipping into the binary mindset that it completely destroys their ability to have independent critical thought. Dave Smith's opening, however, I thought was quite fantastic, and with it, after Dave Smith's opening, what does Laura Loomer say? She goes on to talk about Islam and what Islam is. And she talks about the fact of radical Islam, and that really there is no such thing as radical Islam. The only thing that actually exists is Islam, and that every single person who really follows this religion is nothing more than a religious extremist. It does not matter how peaceful of a person you are, if you follow this religion and you have never committed any violent action upon anyone and have no desire to do so within any fiber of your being and any bit of your soul, Laura Loomer is still painting you with the same brush of that of the religious extremists that will sit there and attack innocent Muslim people just like they are attacking innocent American soldiers who were abroad during our time within these conflicts within the Middle East. Because the thing is, people like this with this war hawk mindset are such a threat to the free people of the world because they would gladly subjugate the world under their ethos and their order solely based on the factors of who they see as the good and benevolent people and who they see as those who are nothing more than the evil ones who they are able to denigrate and then with that throw within the dustbin of history. Because we can see this is something that people within the United States are perfectly comfortable with doing throughout the entirety of the wars within the Middle East. And now what we see is we see this new generation of Zoomers finally on social media finding access to Osama bin Laden's letter to America, I should say, and with it, so many of them are having this revelation that we were lied to about American foreign policy and we weren't told the truth about what happened to the nature of what led to the 9/11 attacks. And because of this, well, many of them are actually left-wing socialist types, so they're misreading the situation and acting like 9/11 was justified, and they're correlating that with the justification of what happened with Hamas. But many people are actually not coming to this conclusion. Many are coming to the conclusion of what happened was a heinous action that happened because of the blowback from the 70 years of foreign policy throughout the Middle East that has led to consistent attacks on American soldiers. And prior to 9/11, it was the 50 years of foreign policy and our intervention within the Middle East that led to the propping up of these dictatorships and the overthrowing of these governments, and with it, it is what propagated and pushed someone like Osama bin Laden, who was a former CIA asset, into committing the actions that took down the Twin Towers and cost the lives of over 2,000 Americans. So what we have to cover here is the fact that Laura Loomer is still just stuck in this mindset, and because of it, she sounds like nothing more than the most radical of people from the time of an era where they genuinely called for nothing more than what sounded like the death of the Muslim world. Now let's go ahead and jump into this clip from Laura Loomer, and then we'll be jumping into another clip after this of their commentary during that debate.
Well, if you read this Hamas Charter, and it's so important for people to understand, you can see within Article 8, okay, Article 8 of their own Hamas Charter, and I brought this because it is so important for people to understand this amid all of the propaganda, okay? This is what these people believe.
What year was this first written?
1988. You can.
Okay, so one thing I want to cover with that just real quick. She's saying this is what these people believe. She's saying this is the Hamas Charter, but she's correlating the Hamas Charter specifically with the entirety of the thought process of the Muslim world.
See for yourself. They say Allah is its target, the Prophet is its model, the Quran its constitution, jihad is its path, and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. And again, the very beginning opening statement of the Hamas Charter, which majority of the Palestinian people support, okay, it says Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. It doesn't say until Hamas will obliterate it, until Islam will obliterate it just as it obliterated others before it.
And with it, she's only talking about the fact of the people within the mindset of the most radical fundamentalist sectors of Hamas and that of the militant extremist groups within the Middle East, many of which we funded and created, but Laura never addresses that throughout the entirety of this debate. Why would she? It would capsize her argument. And as Dave Smith has said numerous times, because I have to listen to it so many times when I start up his podcast, part of the problem, by the way, fantastic, genuinely can't recommend it enough. If you want to know who your next enemy is, look at who you're funding right now. And we can see that this is the nature of what has happened consistently throughout the entirety of this time. The Israelis and the Likud party and Benjamin Netanyahu funded and created Hamas because they wanted to, quote unquote, control the height of the flame. And with it, we see that the process of who they were funding is who they are fighting now. A quote that rings true just as true now as when Dave first quoted it. Let's jump into another piece of this debate.
I'm just saying, I'm well versed in the Israeli propaganda, but the truth is, if you actually,
propaganda.
Okay, the truth it is. The truth is that if you actually,
their own charter.
Okay, well let me talk for a second.
I am
okay?
letting you talk, but it's not propaganda.
Well,
I'm not going to let you lie and say that it's propaganda.
No, I'm
this
not
is their
lying.
charter.
What I'm
this
saying
doesn't
is,
come
guys,
from Israel.
let me trap
I
you
didn't
for a
say
second.
that
Go
didn't
ahead,
come
Dave.
from Israel. I'm saying the Israeli propaganda is when you say Israel's offered them 98%, 99% of what they want, and they just won't take it. All this time, Israel is dying to give them a state. Like, just on the face of it, doesn't that kind of sound ridiculous?
But whether it was the Oslo Accords, whether it was
have you ever seen Netanyahu's videotape when he didn't know he was being videotaped,
Yes,
when he talked about the Oslo Accords? So what did he say? He basically said that he snuck so many poison pills into the Oslo Accord that it was completely unworkable.
But he wasn't part of the Oslo Accord. That was Yitzhak Rabin at the time.
No, he was in the government. Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister.
But he wasn't the prime minister.
But he was talking about how Israel ultimately got to decide what every military zone and danger zone was, and there was never. And then he just defined it as everywhere, as the entire West Bank. They never really made the offer. And if you care to go look into the history of this, you can figure this out. The point isn't that obviously Hamas is a radical Islamist organization. And by the way, just so we're clear on this, Laura, and I'm not denying that there's a problem with radical Islam.
But it's not radical, it's Islam.
Okay, whatever you want to call it. I'm not denying that there's a problem in the Islamic world. I'm not denying, obviously you could look through the Islam. I'm a libertarian. I believe in natural rights and individual liberty. Obviously I see problems in the world. However, if you're going to look at this as an American or as somebody who's supporting the Israeli point of view, and you're going to say, well, look at these savages. They're just so barbaric. Does it not give you pause for a moment that Israel, the United States of America, have for decades been intentionally, strategically, and explicitly supporting the most radical elements of Islam? That America has supported Saudi Arabia, the biggest exporter of Wahhabism in the world, that they've funded, armed, and trained Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that it was, and I noticed this didn't get a response at all, that it was Israeli policy to support, prop up, and fund Hamas.
Okay, so I have a question for you then. Who was propping up radical Islam 1,400 years ago?
Yeah, but okay, so you don't want to respond to what I just said.
I just responded
exactly. And
to
this
you.
is,
the
right,
United
this is what
States
we
of
do.
America is not
Yes,
1,400 years old.
This is such a cop-out. It's such a cop-out. Yes, you didn't respond to what I said at all.
You just said
why don't we
that
do
this
this?
is
Hold on.
14,000 years.
Why don't you
Okay, fine.
respond to his point and then ask him the question? Why don't you address his point and then ask your question?
Actually, address what I said.
He said, oh, we don't want to think about, the way that these people feel because of wars that have been, inflicted upon them by the United States of America, the war on terror, and,
That's not what I'm saying.
But that is kind of the line of thinking that you're taking.
No, it's not.
Right?
You're not responding to what I said.
I just responded.
Why don't you ask her the question?
This existed
and then
long
let-
before
and then
the
you can
United
ask the
States
question
of
about
America
1400.
implemented
I'll ask the
neocon
question.
foreign policy.
Sure, okay. I'll ask the question very clearly, okay? If you're going to say that radical Islam, or as you call it, just Islam, is this problem, then how do you feel about the fact for the last, let's say, 60 years, the United States of America and Israel has explicitly funded, for stated strategic reasons, the worst elements of radical Islam? Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Wahhabism, and they've said they're doing it for a reason, to undermine their competing, interests in the Muslim world. How do you feel about that? Can you criticize Israel at all? Were they wrong to support Hamas?
I can criticize Israel, but
Were they wrong to support Hamas?
This is an irrelevant question because
You won't answer it? You won't say it's wrong to support Hamas. Is it wrong if Iran supports Hamas?
I have obviously said that it is wrong to support Hamas, but
so it was wrong when Israel did that.
The question doesn't really make any sense because when you think
How
about
does it not make any
you're saying
sense
that
if
the United
Netanyahu was
States, because
supporting
you're saying
the
that the
terrorist
United
group?
States
Why don't you do
government
this?
is propping up Islam. I'm not denying the fact that our government, we have jihadists on payroll at the FBI.
Perfect example of Laura Loomer dodging questions there in the end, and as you can see, she does not want to answer because it would give the nature of culpability for Israel's crimes if she was to answer honestly to the framing of the questions that were presented to her. And what I find so fascinating is Laura Loomer is very smart. And she has taken this stance off an initial reaction of emotion. And with this initial emotional reaction, she has gotten to her point that she has taken and she will not move from it. So what's happened then? She rationalized her way backwards. And by doing so, she's able to firmly, logically map why she believes and says what she does. And this is a perfect example of what Michael Malice says when he says, it's much easier to train a smart dog than a dumb dog, because people will have a fervent emotional reaction, and then afterwards, if they're intelligent enough, they can fully rationalize their way backwards as to why that extreme emotional reaction had full justification, and they can make it completely logical within their own framework of thought, and they can present it to some people and make it incredibly convincing due to the nature of how smart they are. Alrighty. So what it says here is Smith pressed Loomer by arguing that if radical Islam is such a dangerous threat, how much blame should we place on Western governments and intel agencies that have propped it up, including Israel for its support of Hamas? That being the question that she ended up dodging, as she goes on to continue and do numerous times throughout the entirety of this debate, because it would give culpability for the nature of many of the crimes that Israel's committed, which, as we can see, Israel not being the only person who is responsible for this, there are blames on all sides, and it's absolutely tragic. And what we see is, whether anyone wants to address it or not, there are horrific instances of violence that were committed both by Palestinians and both by Israeli soldiers within the IDF. And that is something that people who are tribally aligned with either side of this conflict do not want to address. And if they do, they'll say that the violence that was committed on innocent people was justified because, well, they were collateral and we had to get Hamas, or, well, they were collateral and we had to take out the Jews because they're with the IDF and they're with Israel. And neither of these are an excuse for committing the acts of violence that kill innocent people, like the barbarism that has been happening in Israel and within the borders of Gaza and the West Bank through the entirety of this fucking conflict. It's absolutely disgusting. Let's go ahead and get into the next clip.
He did make a point that it's, Trump famously said, if you come at me, I'll come at you 10 times harder. He said that. You know that, right?
And in his speech to the RJC last week, it was brilliant. I loved it. When I saw him, I said, I loved your speech, Mr. President.
Cool, but this question isn't about Trump.
One drop of blood will spill a gallon of yours.
Okay, there it is. Got it. So basically,
and some innocent blood in there, too.
Israel's winning, basically 10-1. So for the 1,200 lives that were foolishly slaughtered at the hands of Hamas, at least 10,000, according to Hamas's numbers, according to UN numbers, we shall see 10,000 Palestinians have died and in Gaza.
According to who?
This is according to UN numbers. Okay?
But the UN,
they're getting their numbers from Hamas, no doubt. Okay. But where do you draw the line? At what point do you stop killing innocent civilians? And 50% of the people that live in Gaza are under 18, meaning they're children. Okay. At what point, how many lives have to be killed in order to get Hamas out of there? Is there any number in mind?
I don't know. Maybe we should, we should contact Elon Musk, because Elon Musk has allowed for Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, to have an X account. And so I think that what we should do is we should try to.
You too.
We should get. Yeah, but I'm not a terrorist, right?
Well,
the DOJ thinks I am, right? Because I support President Trump. But
well, I mean, you're supporting the killing of babies, so I don't know.
Why don't we call?
But she's not actually killing them.
No.
Why don't
You're
we
just
call,
how many
I'm answering
innocent
your,
lives
I'm
need to be
answering
killed?
your
Yes, go
question.
ahead.
Why don't we call Elon Musk and ask him to contact Ismail Haniyeh, who he is allowing to have a platform on X, okay? And we can Skype or Zoom Ismail Haniyeh in from Qatar, where he's being protected right now, and we can say, hey, how many more innocent people need to die? When are you going to move your headquarters from underneath this hospital where babies are in incubators? That's not a question for me. That's a question for Hamas.
You dodged the question again.
I'm not dodging the question. That's not.
Okay,
and
so
I
is
really
the standard,
I don't
Laura,
trust those numbers. I want to finish this
Is the
statement.
standard that people who kill innocent human beings shouldn't be allowed on Twitter? Is that the standard? Like, just give me the objective standard.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, that's
why
not
should
it.
I have to answer the question about when enough is enough? When Hamas is obliterated, that is when enough will be enough.
Okay, so let's say in order to obliterate Hamas, and let's even say it's all on them because they're hiding in the basement of buildings where innocent people are. But let's say in order to eliminate Hamas, I'm not denying that. Yes, no. What I was referring to was the refugee center where there was one suspected Hamas member and they killed like 17 people or something like that. But let's just say hypothetically, Hamas is embedded itself. They're doing this human shield thing where they're underneath buildings with innocent civilians, and in order to kill Hamas, it means 50,000 innocent men, women, and children have to die. You support that?
Look, I don't support innocent people being killed. Innocent
but
people die in war.
If it's what's necessary to take out Hamas, is that what needs to happen?
I'm not answering how many people
I know
need
you
to
won't
die.
answer it.
Because,
I know.
because it's a hypothetical.
It will reveal the point.
No, it's not going to reveal the point.
That's why you won't answer it.
Because I'm not going to decide how many lives need to be lost. That is a question for Hamas.
But the question is, Israel
That's a question for Hamas.
No, okay, fine,
it's not Israel.
fine. So let's just take,
Israel is not trying to kill
for the sake of argument. Let's take for the sake.
You're asking me to decide
Hamas
how
is
many
savages.
people should be killed.
Hamas is savages. It's all on them. Everything's their fault. But Israel is still conducting these operations. So if it takes 50,000 men and women and children who are not Hamas to die, is it worth it? Is that necessary to take them out? And watch, you just won't answer the question.
It's not that I'm not answering the question.
You're literally not answering the question.
Israel has been very strategic.
The thing is that I cannot fucking get over is it's presented, is it worth killing 50,000 men, women, and children if they're all innocent, if it means we can exterminate Hamas? Yes or no? And she just completely refuses to answer. And this is something that you will see happen a lot when you really get down to the brass tacks of what actually happens in these conflicts. It will always be obfuscating and putting the application of guilt onto someone else. And why do we see this happening? Because you know you will then be the villain of this story if you openly step into this role. And what do we see? We see that, no, that's not up to Israel. That's not up to me. That's not up to the Jewish people. That's up to Hamas. It's like, well, here's the deal. With the asymmetric power differential that's happening here, that is why so many people are saying this is solely up to Israel. Because of the nature of the fact that the power that Israel wields in comparison to the minuscule might that Hamas has is almost incomparable. And you can see this if you were even just to look at the nature of the borders of Israel and Palestine. And what do we see here? It says, on the issue of whether supporters of Hamas are innocent, Loomer posted the question, don't people in all societies have responsibility to challenge or overthrow their governments if their governments are not serving the people? And this was a fantastic question, and Dave jumped on it immediately. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip.
Because don't people in all societies have a responsibility to challenge or overthrow governments if their governments are not serving the people?
That is such a great question. So let me just say this, okay? The United States of America, in the last 20 years, okay, between the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, which I think we can all probably agree were like just ridiculous catastrophes that we never should have fought. Let's also add in there the war, Obama's, which I'm sure you'll agree with me about, Obama overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya and leading to the migrant crisis into Europe was an absolute disaster. Let's also throw in there the attempt, right.
So let's bringing in all the refugees to attack Americans.
Yes. Hold on, let me just finish my point. Let's also add in there the attempted regime change war in Syria, which we started, that led to 500,000 people dying. Let's also throw in there the war in Yemen, which we backed the Saudis fighting.
Don't forget the Arab Spring.
Something else like 500,000, somewhere in that ballpark, also died. When you add up all of the numbers, you're talking about millions and millions of dead innocent people. What responsibility do you have? What responsibility do I have? What responsibility do you have? Are we fair targets now to be murdered because we haven't overthrown the status quo, as you just said? Why is it that we as Americans get to hold these standards against other nations which we would never dream of imposing on ourselves? The question is always asked, What's Israel supposed to do? Don't they have a right to defend themselves? Do all of these countries that we've slaughtered innocent people in, do they have a right to defend themselves? Do they have a right to come over here and kill innocent civilians? I would say no. They don't have a right to come kill innocent civilians. You have political grievances with the government class, but it does not follow, as Osama bin Laden or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George W. Bush would argue, that it then follows that we can inflict this collective punishment against people. If we're going to be the better ones, if we're going to say you're the Islamists, but we're the civilized people, if we're going to represent the best tradition of Western civilization, then the point would be that we don't believe in any of that. We don't believe that you can target innocent men, women, and children. That's what separates us from the savages.
Israel is not targeting innocent women and children.
They absolutely are.
Intent matters.
Intent matters, Laura Loomer says, as she echoes the exact same arguments that were used from people that defended the government's actions in Ruby Ridge and Waco. And what I find so insane about this is if we were to put this into a little thought experiment, let's say of our own. Well, intent matters, right, Laura? So that's why the FBI was justified when they were chasing that terrorist who had that bomb threat going around, and it was rumored that he had a bomb that he could kill 500 people with at a minimum. We were justified in leveling that building. Yes, we may have killed 50 to 100 people, but you see in the process, we stopped this terrorist from killing 500 people, so you have to understand that really intent matters. Or would you say, no, you just killed 50 to 100 innocent people by leveling a building based on shoddy justification? You should have used a precise strike because of the nature of the asymmetric power differential that you wield against this one individual. Just a thought. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this clip we have that's queued up next. And the thing that really made me think about my own thought experiment here, just that I wanted to run y'all through, was here we see it says Smith gave the audience a couple of thought experiments to illustrate how extremism takes hold and to question the morality of Israel's current military strategy. And I think that many people have to understand the nature of how these things work. And to do so, you really have to put it into a frame of mind that correlates to something that hits far closer to home than anything that is 6, 7, 8, 9,000 miles abroad. And through that process, you will understand the nature of why people feel many of the things they do through the conflicts that we have been involved in throughout the past 70 years. Now let's go ahead and jump into this clip I have queued up.
9/11 happened to us. What was the American attitude after 9/11? We gave George W. Bush a blank check.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want to do. Drop bombs on whoever the hell you want to drop bombs on, because we are pissed off because we got hit and someone else has to suffer for this. Or was it really the people who did it? Is it just innocent people who are dying?
Now we're suffering.
Whatever.
We're the terrorists.
Okay,
we are the
fine.
terrorists in our
the
country.
The Muslim world has had 1,000 9/11s. And if you sit here and go, look, just imagine, try to imagine, be really genuine here, okay? Because we're going to say we're so much better than the Islamic world. And you know what? I generally do think we are. But even us, who's so much better than them, imagine, not one 9/11, but 1,000 9/11s happened here. What would that look like? And then let's say after 1,000 9/11s happened here, let's say whoever, Iran did it. And then Iran invades and they overthrow our government. And they prop up their own government. And now they rule us. What do you think the toughest right-wing militia members in America would be doing? They'd be throwing Molotov cocktails through their government building. They'd be running up suicide bombing themselves. And I bet they'd yell something about Jesus before they did it too. Because they'd probably start clinging to their religion. So I'm just saying that, like, if we're unwilling in this debate, in this divide, to make a real effort to put ourselves in their shoes and go, what would we do in that situation? If you imagine, listen, this is 1948 is not that long ago, okay? It's our grandpas.
We're talking about 1,400 years here.
No,
we're not talking about 1948. We're
right.
talking about
Okay.
1,400 years of this savagery
No,
and
you are,
barbarism.
but I'm talking about something else. So anyway, so what I'm saying is 1948 was not that long ago, okay? The people, my grandfather
75
fought
years ago.
in World War II, okay? Like he was, he remembers this very vividly, okay? Those people were kicked out of their homes. This was like, look, I'll say this from the Jewish perspective, okay? And there's a big difference. Now, you may not have this as much as I do, but in general, I would say, for Jews, this is true, that our parents' generation are way more connected to like a serious form of anti-Semitism than the current Jewish generation is today.
I will admit Dave's thought experiment was a little bit better than mine, and by a little, I would say by a fucking mile. But nonetheless, I'd argue he's far better at this whole political analysis game than me. If you want someone who is genuinely fantastic at this, does a show consistently, breaking these things down, go give Dave Smith a follow if you are not already. He is one of the best in the game. I genuinely cannot recommend him enough. Him and Robbie the Fire Bernstein host the show Part of the Problem, and it is up episodes roughly 2 to 3 times a week. And the thing is, I really enjoy not only their comedy, but their commentary. And when I found people like Dave Smith, like Eric July, it was like stumbling into an echo chamber, because I had been alone in the dark for so long on the political landscape, detached from anyone actually involved in politics or talking about it, because I was so sick of the nature of what politics is, which I see as nothing more than the devil's game. And because of that, when I stumbled onto someone like Dave Smith, it was a genuine relief, because it's one of those things where you realize, no, I'm actually not alone. I'm not the only person I know that holds these ideals. Maybe I'll never even meet the people online who share similar ideals as I do, but it's nice to be able to associate with those who understand the nature of the fundamentals that drive the core of your being. Alrighty, now we're going to go ahead and get into Dave Smith explaining the history of the region, and with it, I'm sure you can understand Laura Loomer's response and how that's going to go. Let's get into it.
Who do you place a certain amount of blame on who for this current war that's going on right now? Like, how would you place blame on this?
Well, there's a lot of blame to go around, right? So again, as I was saying, there's blame on anybody who's been violent toward innocent people. But if you want to like zoom out and look at the history of this situation, then yes, there's a whole lot of blame to go around. And the truth is that the Israeli government, say from its inception, and we could go even earlier than that, but in 1947, when the UN partition recommendation first came out, the Jewish Zionist settlers owned about 10% of the land, okay? And the UN recommended that they get 56% of the land. And so immediately, the Zionists accepted this agreement, and the Arabs said, no, we don't accept this recommendation from the UN, which, by the way, had no authority to just create nations out of nothing. And then there was a civil war broke out immediately. Other Arab countries intervened as well. And in this process, Israel won. And 750,000 Muslim Arabs were driven off of their land and never allowed to come back to their homes. And so Israel then took over 80%. When they were first recommended by the UN 56, which really they had no legitimate right to claim, but then they took over 80%. And then in 1960, well, hold on, let me just finish what I'm saying, and then you can go. Let me finish, and then you can jump in. Then, okay, this was in 1948. Then they declared their independence, right? Then in 1967, Israel launched a preemptive war, as they call it, and they won that again. And then they took control of 100% of it. And they've had it ever since.
What happens in war, though?
Well, I mean, look, it has happened throughout history in war, but no, the entire tradition of modern Western civilization, particularly post-World War II, has been to reject the idea that you can annex territory through war. And again, I'm not saying we didn't do that with the Native Americans. There are other examples. It happened a lot earlier when that was more permissible. But I would say that at least recognize that this is the starting point of it. And since 1967, both Gaza and the West Bank have been completely dominated by Israel. And if we're going to pretend like that is not even a factor in why there is this hatred toward Israelis, and no, it's just Islamism, it has nothing to do with the policy of the Israeli government, I think we do that at our own peril.
Gotcha. Laura,
it's
your
Islam.
response.
I will say that we need to have a conversation about Islam.
Dave Smith goes to adjudicate the history of the region, and in an attempt to do so, Laura once again goes to interrupt him, as she has done numerous times throughout the entirety of this debate. I do not know whether this was with an intent to make sure she could stop him from making points that she knew would be detrimental to her points that she was trying to make, and it would capsize her arguments, or if it's simply the nature of how she ends up debating and arguing in many different instances, because maybe she feels that with her intellect and with her consistent barrage of information that she can capsize her opposition, and by doing so she will then take the debate and she can get more gotcha moments, and because of doing that, people who are watching this within the audience will end up seeing it and saying, well, Laura Loomer ended up winning the debate. Well, if that was her plan, which I do not know, this is pure speculation, we can see that that certainly did not work, because it has been said by so many people across social media and the polls that I've seen that Dave Smith took this debate decisively, and with it, we can see that the narrative surrounding the support for Israel is shifting, and I'm genuinely curious to see how this is going to lead into the future of U.S. foreign policy. So, what I find unbelievable about this is she talks about one thing and one thing only after Dave talks about the history of the region and all of the conflicts that have led up to these specific, let's say, detrimental blows to Israel's security that they have suffered in recent weeks. And with it, sadly, they have lost so many innocent lives. I believe 1,200 Jews have been killed. As I saw recently, it was last like 6,000 Palestinians. And these are the numbers that I saw that were not entirely exploded and inflated by Hamas. These were people who were on the ground journalists that were actually delivering this information. People who are journalists in Palestine who speak English, who are Palestinian Christians that are relaying this information. And with it, the people who are relaying this information, man, some of the pictures they're posting are just... it's some of the most horrific stuff you can imagine. It turns your stomach and it just brings tears to your eyes. The amount of kids, man. The amount of kids is just unfathomable. And with it, this is a perfect thing that I can bring this into. Dave is talking about the history of the region, and what is Laura stepping into? No, it's Islam. It's just Islam. Islam is the problem. That's her only standard. It must be Islam, and this is the binary mindset that so many people slip themselves into, and I will never drop this framework of talking about the issue of binary thinking when it comes to politics, because it is what has led to the process of supporting the better of two evils for so long, to where people now just actively support evil and they don't even think twice about it. Let's go ahead and jump into what's next.
This is 1988 that we're talking about, okay? And so I don't really necessarily think that it's fair to say that, sure, if you watch your mother and your father get blown up, you're probably going to have a spirit of revenge, and you're going to have deep-seated hatred and want to kill. Anybody would want to kill somebody that that killed their family member, right? I think that that's just human nature. Whether it's, you know, a drunk driver, whether it's an act of terrorism, whether it's a murder, whether it's, you know, whatever it may be.
Vengeance is...
It's vengeance, okay? Vengeance is...
So do you think that plays a part in the Palestinians' hatred for Israelis?
I think that it may play a part when, you know, people are
that's
losing...
something.
I think that...
That's something. We're making progress here. You can at least admit that maybe that's part of it.
But I also think that it's a serious problem when from the moment a baby is born to a Palestinian, they are being taught Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before.
Hey, look. We just had a moment. Look, we just had a moment of some agreement. So I think that's disgusting also. So look at that. Look, we had a moment of agreement.
I don't think there's ever going to be peace in the... I don't ever think there's going to be peace
Acknowledge
between
the
these
agreement,
people.
Laura.
Just literally, let me just give you a second. So you
that.
acknowledge that what Israel has done to the Palestinians might be at least somewhat of a contributing factor to them hating them.
It's not,
Look,
I'm not
let's
saying
say
just what they've done.
9/11 happened to us, right?
I think a lot of what Palestinians have done to Israelis as well, because
Sure,
there are innocent Israelis who have been
I know
killed.
it's tough for you to admit but we came to a moment of agreement there. Listen,
innocent Jews
9/11
who are being killed
yes,
too.
no one's denying that.
And here we see Laura openly admits the fact that she actually understands and can see the reasoning behind why these people may feel the way that they feel, but nonetheless, she can't actually stay on that talking point. She has to blow past it because it is fertile ground for Dave to take space in the conversation. And with it, we see that she tries to get away from it once again. And Dave's like, no, we actually agree on this. Let's build a strong foundational housing for you to understand why the people who are your ideological opposition feel the way that they do about this topic, rather than just sitting there and demonizing them endlessly as you've been doing. This is the first step so you can actually see the mindset with which your opposition wields. And she sits there and she still just tries to get away from it. And I understand why, because it's uncomfortable to grapple with and she consistently dodges it. But this is just, nonetheless, it's wrong. And here's the deal. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I think it's genuinely been a long enough video at this point. So, thank you for watching if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me what I'm wrong in the comment section down below. I thought this debate was fantastic. And I think that it was genuinely incredible that this is going to be the nature of the new media landscape. These open online debates removed from censorship, detached from the regulatory structure of the censorship apparatus that is the mainstream media. And that will only lead to better information coming to the surface, which means we will be able to detach ourselves further from the propaganda administered by the state. And this will only lead to a freer society in return. So, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to throw it into their closing statements. Thank you for watching if you got this far. As I've already said, thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great. Tell someone you love them. Peace out.
Give a closing statement. You've got about 60 seconds or so. I won't count exactly.
Sure.
But give really what you think that people should understand on both sides to basically try to get to some sort of element of peace at the end of the day here?
Sure. Well, thank you to you, Adam. Thank you, Laura, and thank you to Zero Hedge, which has been just an incredible publication. I'm really honored to be on the first of this debate series. I think that's awesome. They've been one, you know, look, I'm an anti-government extremist or whatever. I shouldn't say that publicly, but that's more or less what I am. So
libertarian.
Libertarian. I believe in liberty, and I hate the enemies of liberty.
Makes
And
two of us.
so you know, this publication has been like kind of an oasis in a desert for a lot of people like us for many, many years. So I really appreciate them having us. Look, I'll just kind of reiterate what I think are the most important points that are made in this debate, and I will say respectfully, I do not feel like I ever got a response to the main ones, which is that you can't get away from this. If you're going to look at the Islamic world and say, we judge you by these standards. And what are the standards if we were going to judge them? Well, the standards are what makes us better than them, which I will say I kind of do agree we are, generally. But what makes us better is that we're children of the Enlightenment, that we are the best of Western civilization, that we respect individual liberty and property rights and peace over violence, right? But if we're going to say that, then how can we also say that while defending the most horrific violent actions towards these people? If we're going to blast radical Islam, how can we not at the same time criticize our own governments who have intentionally stated explicitly that this was the strategy to fund the most radical Islamist groups in the world over and over and over again? Now, maybe, and I'm quite open to this possibility, that even if we hadn't have done all of that, even if our governments, if Israel had never supported Hamas, and if we had never supported Wahhabism and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of these other groups, perhaps still Western civilization would be better than the Islamic world. I'd even guess probably it would be more advanced still. But knowing that we did that, how can we sit here and condemn their people without at least condemning our own governments, who we have at least some degree of impact over, not that much, but at least some degree of influence, and not condemn them for supporting these very terrorist organizations? And at every single turn, you know why we supported them? Because they were always the enemy of the secular nationalists in the Islamic world. And we didn't want them to have their own power. And so we supported the Islamic radicalists because we knew that they would undermine them. And in many cases, undermine the commies also was part of the goal. But anyway, I don't know how you can look at the situation in Israel, take the complete pro-Israel position, the complete anti-Hamas position, and not say Benjamin Netanyahu's explicitly stated strategy of supporting Hamas blew up in his face. And man, can we not learn a lesson from that and never do it again?
Well said. Laura, camera, your closing statements. Where can we go from here? What should people understand about your position?
Yeah, well, I want to thank Zero Hedge, of course. It's an honor to be a part of the inaugural debate series. It's been a pleasure, right? Three yids, I say, hashing it out on this conflict. But no, it's really great to be a part of the debate series for such a prestigious and impactful publication like Zero Hedge, which I read, and they're doing such a service to the world, especially in an age of censorship and propaganda. I think that Zero Hedge is one of the leading publications when it comes to bringing people alternative media, independent media, and also news that is checking both the fourth estate, right, of our corrupt media establishment, and also our corrupt governments. And that goes for both political parties. But what I will say is that there is a growing, disturbing trend of normalization and sympathizing behavior for Islamic jihadists, not just here in the United States of America, but also abroad, as we have seen. And we need to call it out. We need to be honest about the fact that this is an ideological war that has nothing to do with land disputes. This has nothing to even do with, you know, how the United States government plans on responding, right, to these attacks by these Hamas terrorists on these innocent civilians. This is a reign of terror that has been ongoing. It's an ideological reign of terror that has been carried out by Islam for 1,400 years. This has nothing to do with 9/11. This has nothing to do with really, I guess you could say, like any modern day conflict. The United States government is not, is not, I guess I would say the United States government, as I said earlier, is not the reason why these countries are reacting the way they are and why these Islamists are carrying out attacks against innocent Jews and innocent Americans. We need to, if we're going to truly understand how our response needs to be to eradicating global Islamic terrorism worldwide, we need to start encouraging our politicians and people in the media to have an honest and open conversation about Islam, because you cannot understand a threat, you cannot combat a threat unless you know the threat. And so I just am here today to speak out for the many innocent Jewish people, Israeli people, and innocent people, I guess you could say, all across the board who have been a casualty in the name of Islam. I will say that I'm here to stand against all of the anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist propaganda that seeks to blame Israel and label them as an oppressor and to blame Israel as an apartheid state. And I'm here to really just make a plea to the world, right? To preserve the livelihood, to preserve the life of the Jewish people. There are only 15 million Jews left on this planet who, in my opinion, are facing an existential threat of eradication and a possible second Holocaust if we do not get this Jew hatred and normalization for Islamic terrorism under control. And I know that I've been deemed an Islamophobe for saying things like that. I know people think that I hate Muslims. I do not hate Muslim people, but I am explicitly and wholeheartedly anti-Islam because I am a human rights activist and I oppose the barbarism and the subjugation of people simply because they will not submit, convert, to the ideology of Islam. And I want to also express my condolences to all of the people around the world right now who are suffering in silence. All of the Jewish students on universities that are scared to go to their classes on a daily basis because they're being threatened with being shot on their college campuses. People that are being beaten up in the streets of America simply because they're Jewish. We do have a Jew hatred problem in this country. It has been normalized by the Democrat Party. And as President Donald Trump has said, the Democrat Party is the party of Israel haters and Jew haters. And we need to call it out. We need to call it out, and I'm not going to stop calling it out.
All right. Laura Loomer, Dave Smith, thank you guys for being here. I think we're all equally honored to be on the inaugural Zero Hedge first debate ever. And thank you, Zero Hedge, for having us. But most importantly, thank you guys out there for tuning in. We will see you guys on the next one.